It is absolutely outrageous. All this fuss about Mathias Cormann racking up all these travel bills, $1 million in travel bills, travelling around the world to become the head of the OECD. What on earth is wrong with that? He is the perfect candidate to become head of the OECD. It involves a lot of travelling, and he has an extremely impressive track record in travelling. Not just in adding $500 billion to Australia's debt, but just a little bit of travelling too. He billed taxpayers more than $23,000 for weekend trips to the resort town of Broome. What we see from these Broome trips is something which will appeal to the OECD immensely. It shows that Mathias Cormann is a family man. He puts his family before other interests like taxpayers and flights and things like that. He's eminently suitable to this job. Then there was the case of the family flights to Singapore, a little holiday in Singapore. Well, what's wrong with that, for goodness sake? Now, yes, they were paid for by Hello World, a Liberal Party donor, which had just received, in fact, $1 billion contract from the Ministry for Finance, entirely arm's length, entirely Chinese-walled and incidental, a fluke, and properly explained. This is how it was explained. Senator Cormann said he had no idea that his credit card had not been charged. This happens all the time. And this is why Cormann is so eminently suited to the OECD job, which involves so much travel, because he is so well practiced in travel. So well practiced in travel that he even invoked the services of the Royal Australian Air Force to get to Scott Morrison's inauguration with Peter Dutton. $60,000 worth of RAAF flights to fly from Perth to Sydney for the inauguration and then back. This shows that Cormann is very well prepared in the event of a crisis at the OECD to invoke the forces of NATO to get himself from A to B, perhaps a family holiday as well. What does OECD do anyway? It's like an ornament. It just sits on the mantelpiece. Doesn't really do much. It's sort of an honorary sort of PR sort of position. They have meetings and talk fests, and they discuss things like tax, and nothing ever happens. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. We really need to have a close look at Mathias's voting record. He's very pro-privatisation, which is a good thing for the OECD because they, frankly, need to be privatised. They're not doing much. They'd be much more efficient if they weren't in government's hands. What else? Anti-climate change. He's voted against ending immigration detention. He's voted against a fast transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. He's voted against a national redress scheme for institutional abuse survivors. He's voted against marine conservation. He's voted against protecting the Barrier Reef, the Great Barrier Reef. Very sensible. It's overprotected, the Barrier Reef. Everybody knows that. He's voted against public transport. Well, that's a waste of time, public transport, isn't it? It's so slow. He's voted against strengthening gun control laws, of course. He voted against withdrawing troops from Afghanistan because that's going so well. He's voted against a review of parliamentary entitlements, against a resource rent tax to make the billionaires' resources people pay more tax. He's voted against a carbon price, of course. Carbon, what a ridiculous thing. Mathias Cormann has voted against the idea that Parliament needs to approve wars, military deployments. Why the blazes can't the government just say, we want to have a war, and then just have a war? Why do they need to go to the Parliament and make it all public and seek consensus with the opposition, the crossbench and the Labor Party? Why do they? The Labor Party loves a war too. They all love a war, these people. So once he gets over there to Europe and takes up that plum position, the greatest of all taxpayer jobs, the greatest of all red tape, the OECD, one of the most unnecessary institutions in the world, Mathias can get in there and make a meaningful contribution. He can get in there and vote against the OECD having to seek approval for wars. The OECD can go to wars. They need a good war, the OECD. It will give them a purpose for being, a raison d'etre. Mathias Cormann, he is the man for the job. Mathias Cormann is the man for the job.